Thanks for listening to Just About Managing. To stay up to date with new episodes, remember to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and discover what comes next on our LinkedIn page. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Just About Managing podcast. Today we're joined with Andy Pincott as our guest eagle. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy to give us a bit of an introduction to his, I guess, very interesting career evolution background, and we're going to learn a little bit about how he's gotten to that place. And then, as always, we'll throw him some questions to drive our conversations. Andy, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm Andy Pincott. It's hard even now to describe what I do these days. I think there are phrases like "I've gone plural," "You've semi-retired, haven't you?" and other things like that throw out to me. I guess I've got sort of 5 things that are on the go right now. I masquerade as the affordable wine hunter on Instagram, with 100,000 followers on there, pursuing my passions for wine. I have a small truffle plantation of 3 acres where I farm truffles and try and market and sell those, pursue my passion for food. I do some artwork for people, some art commissions of people's houses. I have a small burgeoning business with a friend around the corner who equally doesn't want to go back to the corporate world, where we're trying to build outdoor bars and kitchens for people, particularly if they've got green eggs, because we feel if you've got a green egg, you can afford one of our green egg tables to go all the way around it. I would be lying if I didn't say that the backbone of what I'm doing is held up by a very small property portfolio of 3 property rentals, which I've built up over the last 25 years, which I guess feeds back into my other story. So that's what I'm doing now. I guess the question is, how do I get here?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So how do you switch? So I think post uni, didn't know what I wanted to do, thought I wanted to go into advertising. Somebody persuaded me that selling advertising space was the right thing to do. 3 months later, I realized it was the wrong thing to do. And then went around 2 or 3 other companies, eventually running a little event management business as part of a publishing house, running award ceremonies and things like that, for the great and the good in the publishing world. And as I was doing that, I realized a couple of key things for me. One is I didn't really like selling. And secondly is I really like the sort of project-based work, start, middle and end. And I figured that actually somehow I could get paid for my brain rather than pay for the selling side of things, and the commission on that was where I wanted to go. And so with that in mind, management consultancy kind of came up in front of me, and I went back and did the milk round, as it was called then, to try for the graduate recruitment jobs, and landed one with Arthur Andersen, as it was called then, and started, I think, 2 days after my 26th birthday, along with people who were 21 years old who had just gone straight school, 3 years uni, and bam, they're out of the box.
Did you feel very old?
I did, but yeah, because at 26 I felt old, but quickly got over that, because I think I had a few more life experiences than some of the other people. And it was bizarre on one level, going from managing at one stage this massive award ceremony in the Grosvenor Hotel in London, which at the time was the biggest venue, did 1,100 people. Bob Monkhouse was presenting this day. We had 35 people doing AV and stuff like that. No mobile phones, and we were all coordinating with walkie-talkies, and I was in charge of all of that. And I went from that to, within a matter of weeks, literally, Annie, can you go and photocopy 10 copies of that because we've got a meeting this afternoon? So that was quite strange, but it was one step back to go 3 forward, and the pay went up. So I figured it was in the right place. Many stories about my time, with Anders Consulting, and then transferred to Accenture, as people probably know it now, at around 2001. But I made pretty good job of it. Made managing director, as it's called there now, would have been partner at the time. In 10 years. So by 36, I'd risen to, a reasonably good rank, and then stuck out another 5 years there, because ironically, it kind of took me back to what they wanted, you had to sell again. And I then had this sort of, I think, $6 million sales target on my head every year, which I didn't really enjoy. I really enjoyed doing the consulting work, the getting into meetings, brainstorming, figuring out how to solve a problem and getting on and doing it. That was the side I really, really enjoyed. So an offer came up with Gazprom, the Russian oil and gas firm. We had still do have a subsidiary in London, to effectively do an in-house consulting job. I was called Director of Business Capability, but I was really in charge of operational improvement across many different areas. And that actually was a really, really good fit for 2-3 years. That was a good place to be. And then, for want of a better way of putting it, Moscow got interested in this small little subsidiary in London was starting to make a lot of money, and therefore became far more relevant to the mothership that I think was 5 parent-childs removed to us in terms of subsidiary before you got back to big Gazprom. And then they descended on us with a full set of auditors and everything else who assumed that all the work we were doing was with our brothers, cousins, and everyone else. And it was no longer a great place to be. Did a couple more years and then left there, and then went to Travelex, the money exchange people, which for me was a very, very good place to be. It covered a lot of elements that I was in charge of front office operations, so rather than back office operations like IT and HR. So I looked after supply chain, which was very relevant from all my management consultants experience. I looked after global pricing, which was great because I'd helped BP do global pricing at some point in the past with when I was with Accenture. I was in charge of a cool contact center of 100, 150 people. I was in charge of look and feel of the stores, which was great because I had to sort of, could get some of my artistic side out. Very early doors, I went to art school for a year, so it was kind of quite nice to actually, sit down and have a conversation with the designer and him to go, oh yeah, you know what you're talking about. It's like, well, I did a little bit, but he was still the expert, but it was still, he was really happy for positive contribution by someone who understood the language, so to speak. And then I was in charge of all of the operational, the kind of risk operational side of all of the wholesale and retail divisions there as well. So pretty big job, about 6 functions, about 250 people, was going very well. I was being lined up to be their next COO, because the current COO at the time was on a 3-year contract, and it was kind of, understood that was where we were going. And then 2 things happened. One, we had a cyber attack, which brought us to our knees. And just as we spent 3 months crawling out of that cyber hole, because it struck, and there's a whole conversation around cyber at sort of midnight on New Year's Eve, and it hits New Zealand first because that's where the time zones pop up.
Yeah.
And then, by the time you got to midday, it was all chaos. Anyway, it took us 3 months to bring that back up. And literally just as we almost brought the final store up to full operational capacity, having been working on pen and paper for a while, COVID hit. And then, as you can probably then imagine, COVID and travel industry didn't
suit no need for well currency. Yeah.
So I spent 6 months making either furloughing people or making them redundant, knowing that my tier was effectively next on the list. They sold a whole bunch of they sold the whole of the US business. The restructurers were effectively in, just trying to keep the company afloat. So kind of most people went, and a skeleton team of, finance director and the legal team pretty much held it together with an interim COO who was a, quote unquote fixer who kind of came in to just keep it going, which they did a good job of. But, I was part of the waste that was not needed in terms of a global role, was not really needed in a firm that didn't really have a global business at the time. So with that, I kind of go, okay, what am I doing now? And went back to consulting, back to Accenture, because I had some good friends there, and did that for 2 or 3 years. I was thinking about going permanently, and then really just said that I wasn't enjoying it. It was all the things that I left consulting for in the first place, wasn't enjoying that side of it, and so decided to make it on my own and go out and do the other things. And I think just before I pause, I think I've done for 10 minutes. the where I got to now wasn't a coincidence, right?
Right. It was
To set up,
planned. That was going to be my
it was planned.
question.
There was always a master plan. I always knew I was never going to go to 65 in the corporate world. The trees for the truffle farm were planted in 2009. And as I went through, various points in my career, was, fortunate enough to have a couple of, reasonably sized bonuses, particularly at Gazprom, because I was really in the trading kind of side of the business at that point. Rather than go out and buy lots of smart cars and watches as my peers were doing, I put a deposit down on a flat, and I would do that. And I, did that a couple of times. And with the view always being that at some point, if I could build that up, that would be enough to kind of sustain, if not in semi-retirement, but would then be an extra boost to retirement as well. So there was always this plan to do, the truffles were going to come in, the properties were going to come in. I didn't know what the other one was really going to be at the time, but I just kind of knew if that was enough to kind of, sustain me financially, the other one would appear when the moment was right, which was then, brought me into the wine world, almost coincidentally, a little later on, which is kind of, not that it really pays any money other than free wine and the odd bits and pieces, but certainly time wise, that's probably the thing that I'm doing. And I think the question I get sometimes, people say, I'm always getting, so what do you do? And then immediately, well, how does that make money? And, how much money are you making out of truffles? And they kind of go, no one ever asked me how much money I made when I had a corporate job. No, they're obsessed with how much I could make out of this, how much I could make out of that. So I turn around and it's actually the line I used to say, are you asking me what I do or are you asking me how I make money? Because there are two different questions completely. I make money mostly through property. What I do is mostly the wine stuff. And I'll pause there. I think I've done 10 minutes as my intro. And I'd like to say, actually, and this may be useful for people, when I interview people for jobs, partly because I'd only read the CV a lot of times and I just circled a few things I hadn't really gone to in detail. One of my opening questions was always, give me your potted history in 5 to 10 minutes. And back to, a point out, if they were still talking after 20 minutes, they were gone, right? Part of the skill of, working and doing things for me was actually, if you say 5 minutes, it's 5. If you say 10, it's 10, and work from there. Anyway, I'll pass over to you. Any of that, what that was interesting. I've skipped bits, embellished others, and leave it there.
Wow, where do we start? But
my mind's buzzing, to be honest. It's like, did any of those interviews that you had, Andy, did any of them finish with, oh, by the way, I've got a truffle patch and I've got a...
Not yet.
Unbelievable.
Not yet.
Andy, can we go to the point where you were at Travelex, right? And you'd had this stellar career and you were like working through things, you've made your way up, you've been prolific, going through different roles, you've been in demand, all that stuff. But then you run into super challenges, right, with COVID and with the cyber attack, right? And that's just like a huge change to your plans, right? All right, you had this long-term plan, but the immediate plans had to change. And then you kind of, had to go back into Accenture, which probably wasn't plan A at the time because it was a COO role. How did you cope mentally with such fundamental shifts to your kind of like base plan? How did you do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is difficult, and I say is because I think there's still times when I sort of, struggle with it a little bit as well. I think there was a gap between Travelex ending and Accenture started probably about 6 to 8 months when, I, for want of a better word, ran the numbers on myself, was, trying to calculate this, that, and the other, and was kind of getting two things came to me. A is that I needed to earn a bit more money before I could, really stop. And so that let me go into Accenture and just bank everything that I could to sort of, and, still living off some of that now. And I think the other thing was what are you going to do? Because that was a bit of a realization you may have solved your money problem. And I think, most people, not most people, a lot of people at our age who've been through our business couldn't in some way solve their money problem. You just downsize, you just take as serious the choices they made with the choices you wanted to, but effectively you could probably got enough in a pension pot to go, you know, if it really hits the fan, we'll survive, we'll be okay. But it's a very different question about what do you do, because you know, you're not going to business meetings, you're not doing all of these things, you're not in charge of lots of people, and you need to in some way feel relevant, that you're doing something, and that's really where that's when I started in the wine stuff. And it started because I always liked wine, didn't have a clue why I liked this bottle, not that bottle. So I went and did this WSET, which is the Wine Spirits Education Trust course, level 2. And it was like a light bulb going on for me, like, that's it. It was almost like learning a language where you just learnt the basics, like, okay, verbs and, you know, nouns, and this is how it's structured together. And it just started to make sense. And that's when I started doing the blogging side of things. It just,
so
became
how many years has that been going for?
Nearly 3 now.
Right. Wow.
Nearly 3, yeah.
It's not that long then.
Huh?
Not that long.
Not that long. Not that long. Just done year 3. But I started doing the exam before I started the blog. So the wine stuff was sort of year and a half. And it was after that I was thinking what I could do with that, trying to work it out. And then you kind of question, what do you do? I thought, well, you know, a world in which I get invited to wine tastings and get free wine sent to me in the post and go and meet and talk to other people about wine. That's something I could do. I don't know how I get paid for that a bit more, but so that in part solved the problem, I think, for me, that it gave me a bit of purpose and, you know, something that I do when I get up in the morning. I still struggle a little bit on some of the other side about you get to you know, this age, this set of experiences in life, and, you know, less people are, you know, I don't want to feel like you passed it, but some people just aren't interested in hearing. When I did dip my toe back in Accenture, I think it was 2.5 years I was there. I, you know, obviously told some of these stories, and their cyber team, you know, got in contact via someone had said, oh, you know, Andy Pincott here, he's lived through a cyber attack at Travelex, and I had this sort of hour meeting with them, talking to them about, you know, the realities of a cyber attack, because that bit of paper you've got with your disaster recovery plan in a drawer somewhere really doesn't make the same difference. It's not quite like that. And I, you know, said, actually, I think there's, you know, because they were obviously consulting 2 companies. So I said, look, you know, very happy you to just wheel me in as a bit of grey hair to just tell them some life stories around this. I think there's a scope to make a game out of this, you know, as a sort of scenario planning thing, where the reality for us is, I mean, if you put the top 10 people in a room and say, right, we're going to scenario plan a cyber attack on the business, and then the first thing you do is you get to pick a 1-2 number out the hat, and everyone with a 2 leaves the room, and they're not involved, because that's the reality, because you can't get hold of them for 24 hours. One guy was like, you know, on a ski trip somewhere, you know, with no reception, and we didn't get hold of him for like a day and a half. You know, that was the COO, actually. The interim COO. So, you know, and I thought, yeah, they were going, this is fantastic. This is a great story. I think the clients would be lovely to hear this. I get, you know, I'm here, you know, I've got capacity in work. You just, you know, get back to me, tell me what you want to do, have a shot to meetings. You know, it doesn't cost them anything because I'm being paid for anyway. Nothing. And I kind of, and maybe that's the company, maybe it's something else, but it was a bit of kind of, oh, okay, right, you know, how relevant am I? There's all this experience, but actually, you know, do people mind or care, or they're just so focused on their own thing and channeling into what they're doing that it was, you know, harder to you know, come to terms with that.
So any tips for anybody going through that kind of change?
I think finding those other things was really important for me. I think, you know, finding other things to focus on and not being narrow on trying to go back into what you're doing before, because I think, you know, it's hard, dare I say, perhaps harder for men sometimes. You know, no one wants, look, where we are, you know, 4 middle-aged white men in our, I don't know, 50s maybe, I don't know, but, you know, and, you know, you can see the young blood coming through, right? And they're younger, they get paid a lot less, and they're young and they're hungry, and you can see it. And I can see that there's less relevance for me in the workplace in that sense. So finding other things to do was very important, and just coming to terms with that fact, finding relevance in some other way, really. And actually, I was talking to one of my old bosses, actually, who's older than me. He's 66, and he only really quit 6 months ago after, another funeral that he went to, I'll put it that way, and said, actually, really, it's time I just stopped, and I'm still zooming around the world doing all sorts of stuff. Hugely successful guy. And he said, it's funny, as soon as he left, the phone stopped ringing. It was just, kind of weird, and he's kind of coming to terms with that as well now. But
do you think, and there's interesting some of my reflection in terms of what I've got involved in, I guess, in this new gig economy career that I have, that you've ended up, as you say, with like 5 different things that occupy your time. Do you think that part of the reason for that is it almost like in some ways synthetically replicates the fact that you had a job that had a broad set of responsibilities, and it's I know from my reflection when I was a COO that I had my fingers in so many different pies and so many different things going on, and that's almost like what drove me, was that intellectual challenge the whole time. And I think as I've evolved into, I guess, my version of your what you're doing, is that I find that I get the thrill from the diversity of different companies I work with and the different types of things I get involved in. And to me, that's in some ways it's scratching that old itch. I
think that's a very good point, and I think that actually, if I think that's probably reflected through most of my career. Actually, the reason I went into consulting, I've got a very low boredom threshold, right? And the thought of being a job when I was going through the same thing, even if that was on an annual cycle, doing the same thing year after year, didn't appeal. So consultancy, when you're in different clients and different areas, and the diversity that equally, as you said, in the kind of COO kind of roles, the same kind of thing. And I think that, definitely the same now, having that diversity. And also, you're hedging a little bit as well, whereas, there might be nothing in one zone for months, something else will be doing well. So that, there's never a time when, I think only one time when all 5 of those were kind of going full guns, actually about this time last year, and it was very, very busy. I prefer it when there's sort of one's up, one's down, one's up, one down, and actually adds that side diversity to it.
How did, a real random one, but I knew about the wine, obviously. John filled in and seen a bit about you there, Andy, but how did the truffle start? You said you started that in, was it 2009? You said you planted the first tree.
Yeah, that was so. When we moved out of London, we were looking for a house with about half an acre to an acre as a garden. I mean, that was the advantage of moving out of postage stamp in London, with our 3rd child on the way. And then the house we ended up buying came with a 3-acre field attached to it. And, we were trying to figure out what to do. And I'd actually watched this guy on Dragon's Den a couple of years before, saying that he'd developed a way to impregnate the roots of saplings with the spores of truffles, so that they would produce truffle trees, in the future. And because the truffles grow in a symbiotic relationship with the tree, I don't know if you know that. So so we just thought, well, why don't we get a couple of those trees when we moved to the country? Then I looked him up, and he changed his business model. He was originally asking for money so he could go and buy land and do this himself. That wasn't working out, and so he'd flipped the model to looking for people who had land and wanted to go into kind of partnership. And so we just talked about all of that and thought that would work quite well. So actually, he provided the trees at a cut down price, and then we're still in partnership. And as I hunt the truffles with the dog that's now knocking things over behind me, trying to hunt around the study.
That's not a truffle pig, Andy. That's a dog.
No, it's not a pig. Not a pig, just a daft dog. So I then send the truffles to him, and he does all the marketing and selling of them. Gets me out of sales again.
I was just about to say that. The next question is, how does the sales marry up with this new environment? I think that, going back to the world that we're all in now, in a way, the bit I've struggled with, being honest, is the selling. How do I, not selling me, but how do I sell me as a coach? How do I sell this? How have you married that up now in your new world? Have you taken some of the selling aspect out then?
No, because I struggle with it because it takes me out of my comfort zone. But life always takes you out of your comfort zone, so I just have to sort of push myself forward. So with the wine stuff in particular, the way to make money is to do, pay promotions for people, basically. So there's this sort of, I'm talking to a bunch of PR agencies, some of the bigger companies about that. I've done some paid pieces of work, but I'm probably not charging the rates I should do, which is largely down to me just not going out and going, boom, it's this, I'm worth Y, you need to do this for me, which is, how I probably should be behaving. I'm much, actually, I probably could help you out a little bit here. I'm still terrible at it, actually. Really, really not very good at all.
Well,
But yeah, I do. I
Andy,
recognise I have to get myself into that zone. And also, I think, for me, there's integrity is an important thing with the wine stuff. So the piece I've just done with Majestic actually has worked really, really well. Where I've helped them promote Black Friday, but I get to choose the wines. So for me, that's great. It's not like they say they're not putting wine in my hand and I'm holding it up like an advert. It's like, yeah, I'm helping you promote Black Friday, but this for me. These are the best choices you can make in Majestic for Black Friday, and that works quite well. So hopefully they're happy with that one, and I'll do some more with them in the future. But I'm gradually building it up.
So Andy, as it is Black Friday this week, and totally being like selfish and me,
Yeah.
right? Like, come on, then. Like, what are the tips for this week, Black Friday week? What are they?
Well, Majestic has.
It doesn't just have to be Majestic because we're not.
It depends what zone. I mean, the thing with wine, if you're in the supermarkets, that you should only ever buy wine when they've got 25% off for getting a mixed 6-bottle wine. If I'm assuming you can afford to buy 6 bottles at once rather than you can only got enough money for 1 bottle of wine, which that doesn't work. But yeah, that's the only time you should ever buy wine in the supermarket. They come round sooner or later. So, you just need to buy and stock up. And then Black Friday is a little bit different. The supermarkets haven't got anything necessarily special on for Black Friday, but Majestic have gone for it quite well, actually. The only other similar sale which comes up in a couple of weeks with Waitrose is they do 10 fine wines for £10. And that
£1 a bottle.
Yeah, I mean, last year they it won't be on this year. This lovely Italian red by Antinori called Villa Antinori, which is made by the same people who make this very expensive what they call Super Tuscan wine called Tignerello, which sells for about 140 quid. Their entry level wine is about £17, and last year Waitrose had it on for 10 for 1 week. And I know people in the on-trade wine business who were literally just going to Waitrose to stock to buy as much as they could and then sell it in their restaurants.
So Andy, that's the gem. Let's go slower. What was that called again?
I know it's not in the sale this time. I know that one's not there, but I will publish it. Yeah, just follow me on Instagram. I'll be all over this. I'm under embargo. I'm not allowed to tell you what's on offer in the Waitrose one when it comes on, unfortunately. But the Majestic one, and look on there's 5 or 6 really great recommendations there. There's a Chateauneuf du Pape that's going for £16.99, and they're normally £24-25. That's a great one. And my favourite kind of everyday French Macon Chardonnay is normally about £15. That's at £9.99, called Les Pierres Blanches. So that's that's my biggest tip, because that's the wine I'd probably drink. Well, I used to drink the most, because a lot of this the wine thing started. We used to get all of our wine in France. We were only an hour from the Channel Tunnel. Blues Cruise was the thing, and 4 of us used to go in a van twice a year to France. A friend fortunately didn't drink, but his wife drank enough that it warranted a trip. And he worked from home and equally was keen to get out of the house once in a while. So actually a trip to France. And so we go to actually Majestic in Calais, another place called Calais Wine. You can do wine tastings with them in the morning. And then so you can just, okay, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. Stock up. Then we go for lunch about, 1 o'clock, and then roll home at about sort of 6 in the evening. So I literally did that for 10 years until COVID and then Brexit put a stop to that. And that was kind of the convergence of things drive me towards wine. That was the other big one. That's you didn't arrive back in the UK having been buying lots of wine for £3 or £4 a bottle. It's quite expensive here now, isn't it? And then getting into this offers on, that offers on. this offer's on, and that kind of brought that together. Then as I started getting into that, people were like, oh, that's quite interesting, Andy, what's on offer this week? And as you were saying there, and that's what sort of led to the actually I might as well just start sticking this on Instagram and see what happens with it and start mucking around. And then for that one, and I think this is a lesson for people as well, it is really just taking a leaf out of, I would say, the kids, but younger folks, but you just get on and do it, right? I mean, the amount of times I've held up presentation slides that say do, learn, do on them, and that kind of thing. And it really was a case of that. I thought, actually, sort of, I have literally nothing to lose here. I'm just going to start posting out on Instagram January 1, 2022, and see what happens and learn from the mistakes, silly mistakes like, you can't hear me properly. I need to get myself a decent mic. Need to get the lighting sorted, that kind of stuff. And then just honing the message on what worked well with people, which got more likes than others. And it, really kind of classic management consultancy coming in, actually, in terms of a quite analytical approach I take to what's working, what's not working, and applying a lot. I mean, I've done work in brand marketing before, helped launch BP Ultimate, the fuel, the premium fuel back in sort of 2003. So all this stuff I've just applied to what I do now, and got friends at Google, he said, just find your niche and then be consistent. And actually it's not that difficult, right, to do that. So actually that's what and there's so many people out there who are not gaining more followers because they're just all over the place. And then they're doing a comedy thing one week, they're doing something else another week. And there's just a lack of, and people, well, the Instagram world is they want to, they'll follow you because that's what you do. And you start doing something else, they're not interested. That's why they're following you for that. So actually a lot of that analytical stuff, applying it to what I'm doing on the Instagram stuff. And then it took off. Now, beginning of the year, I had, I think, 3,000, 4,000 followers, and I now got 104,000. So it really started taking off from March this year, basically.
Is that where it's grown from? Just in that period, it's gone up the 100,000?
And do you write scripts or notes? How many takes do you, on average, have to do in terms of bloopers and that kind of thing?
I do a roughly script. I roughly know what I'm going to say, and then film 20 minutes to do, and then probably more editing. Actually, then it's probably an hour to edit it and get the text right and stuff like that, because it does do auto translate from your voice, but it inevitably, especially with wine and French words, makes various spelling mistakes that I try and correct, but my French is terrible, so I usually leave the accent going the wrong way round or something else, terrible as well, because I'm always just doing it on my phone, just doing it quite quickly, actually.
So at what point, how many followers did you have when you got your first invite to a supermarket wine tasting?
That was really low, actually. I think maybe I had 1,000, and it was more networking that got me in there. In fact, that was, that I think it's probably the other lesson from this is a lot of it is about networking in terms of the invites and where you go and what you do. I'd met, it was really, I think I approached somebody, they was doing a launch for wine, and I saw some of these other Instagrams were going. So I literally pinged them, say, hi, I think I had 400 followers, and said, just started out, do you mind if I come along? And they said, yeah, do. So, it's one of those moments when you walk into a room and you literally know nobody, right, at all. And then just having to sort of dig deep, go out there, start introducing myself, start talking to people. Some of those conversations went nowhere. And I made sort of 2 or 3, I would say, friends, burgeoning of friends at that, who I then got in contact with again, followed up. It's classic networking stuff, really. And then that led to an invite to somewhere else. And I got speaking to a lady there, and I said, what I'm really trying to get to next is to get to press tasting. So I said, you should meet this guy here, Richard Banfield. He's a master of wine. He works with Lidl. I'm sure he could get you in there. So I went and spoke to him, and he was like, yeah, absolutely. No worries. Send me an email and I'll get you to the next Lidl taste. So once you're in one, I would then approach some of the others, go, I've just been to the Lidl press tasting, because there's a website you go to with all of their contact details on when there's an event going on. So classic old school networking. And that's really, if my kind of experience in, analytics and so my creative side has got me the followers online, it's really the experience of networking and, I would like to say being a nice person to work with at the end of the day, but, just getting on with people. And, if you're invited to something, you show up on time, you thank them afterwards, and you do all the right things. Like, I guess I was kind of talked you through it, and that sort of gets you from one place to the next place. And now I get, many, many invites.
One of the questions I was going to ask as you were talking earlier, Andy, was putting the financial side of things aside, you've touched on it a little bit there, but could you have done what you're doing now without that previous 20 odd years experience of doing what you'd done previously? And the reason I ask is obviously people ask you said, what are you earning now, what you're doing? I assume some of that comes about because they go, I would love to do what you're doing. But could you, like I say, financial pieces aside, could you do what you're doing now without having done what you've done previously, do you think?
I think so. I think, that I'll go back to that classic do, learn, do line. And I think, anyone's capable of doing that. I think as long as you're open to learning from your own mistakes, I see people doing the same thing and it's clearly not working. So why are you not changing it? If you know what I mean, that what's that? The adage that only a fool does the same things 100 times and expects the same result. So you've got to keep. So there's basic principles. I could probably write it down on a piece of paper and in half an hour. There's just of stuff that I've learned, but I think anyone with some intelligence should be able to learn the stuff I've learned from that. And I think equally with networking, yes, it's been helpful, but again, there's an element of common sense, in there. And, just like with, meetings in another word, you invite you to things and you don't show up, then don't expect to get invited back, right? At the end of the day, be grateful of being, for what life's getting you at those stages.
Right. We're jumping around now, but I'm interested in the truffles over a season. What volume do you farm?
It's seasonal. I think it's probably the answer there, but probably 12 kilos.
Wow.
Last year I probably got 20 kilos, but they're not all sellable. So of those, that 20, only a smaller amount is a good enough to sell on the market. You get a lot of them have been eaten by worms and slugs and various other things, and those are some of the challenges that I go through to get to that point. And we're working on the ground. So the ones that that are sort of half eaten, they go in the freezer. You make some sort of paste with them over the winter night, and then in January I'll go and inject that into the ground effectively by digging a hole and pouring some of this stuff in to try and cultivate the field a little bit more. You said that where's business come in? Literally last weekend I was at the Great British Truffle Festival. Yes, who knew there was such a thing? But there is. And I gave a speech there. So I guess that kind of going back to the corporate world, right? They're probably and actually part of the crux of what I was talking about was actually is that you start out and you think I'm just going to grow and plant 1,000 trees, and 10 years time I'm going to start harvesting truffles. It's really not that easy, and the reality is you are a farmer. And throughout those 10 years, I've been pruning, chopping, weeding, training a dog, going out there, being consistent. It's not, not been that easy, but it's been a lot of fun. And I think there was, the point you were just making earlier about, could you do this before? How do you get there? Somebody said something to me recently that resonated a bit. Is that often people are jealous of your success, but not of the hard work you put in to get there. Right. And I think, both in the wine stuff, it's, I've put a lot of time and effort into that to get to this point, and which I don't regret for a minute. And the same with the truffle stuff as well. That was a 10-year plan. It was I spent hours and hours and hours out there in that plot pruning hazel trees, which just grow like that, and then you've got to try and get them down so that you can actually walk up and down, the size, and then weeding and stuff like that, so, hopefully that again, I'm in only year 2 of harvest because of the other corporate world. I haven't been able to harvest them before that because I haven't had the time to put into it. I guess I'm optimistic. I don't think it's reached its full potential yet, but there's enough signs that I think I should be able to get a lot more out of that one.
There must be times in there, Andy, right, when you weren't quite so sure right? That kind of hard work, those periods. So, self-doubt, the inner critic, the voice in your head. Yeah,
Massive,
particularly because
massive.
you're
I
at,
mean, I think especially with the wine, I think there's a constant. I think as most people suffer from imposter syndrome that you get,
Hmm.
and I've certainly had that in the wine world because you're entering into a room full of wine experts, and what do you do? Oh, I'm an Instagrammer. It just, it even doesn't feel right. Funny enough, now I've got to like 100,000 followers, which is a significant
Yeah, so
number in
in
this
that bit
world.
though, Andy, right? In
Yeah,
that bit where you're in those moments and it's early,
yeah.
yeah, and it will still be there now because you'll have these like 20, 30 year like sommelier type. But in those earlier moments, how did you manage that? Did
I
you do anything mindfully? Did you do anything mindfully to kind of like prepare yourself, like in terms of mental health awareness in advance, or was it your background? Like,
No,
yeah, how
I
did
think
you
the
cope?
background helps. Certainly a background as a management consultant because you effectively make a career out of being one chapter ahead of the client. I said a little bit flippantly, a little bit not flippantly, but that is often the case. That you know enough more to be relevant to look back and help someone up that next step. You don't necessarily know everything. I mean, the guys at the top, as you get more senior, they do know an awful lot more. But certainly, as you're more junior, you just need to know more than the person you're helping to get them up to the next level. And so I think that helps. And I think maybe you would call this mindfulness. I guess the reassurance I gave myself in the wine world is that bizarrely, I'd say 80% of the content that is out there is about fine wines and is wine
Brilliant.
experts talking about fine wines and doing, and what they all are and who know way, way more about wine than I do. Well, we'll ever know. And only 20%, maybe less, maybe 10% is just doing the supermarket stuff because you look at wine buying, 90% of people buy their wine in the supermarket,
Yeah,
right? And a 10, maybe less are buying fine wines and are buying from independent wine shops and know lots about wine. So actually, if I sort of reassure myself around that, is that it's okay for me to not know all of this stuff because I'm not trying to talk to wine experts about how great a wine is. I'm trying to talk to, the 70-80% of the people who are just lost in the supermarket and don't know which way to turn, and then just to give them that bit of help to actually, you know what, you've heard of Chateauneuf du Pape, it's a good wine, you may really like it, but it's £22 a bottle. Why don't you drink Lirac because it comes from the right next door to Chateauneuf du Pape. It's just across the river. It's made the same way. The soil's the same. It's almost the same stuff. It just hasn't got the brand name, and you can get that for £11 a bottle. And that's that's all. And it's simplifying that for people to make that an easy thing to understand and go, hey, it may still be £11, but hey, it's not 22, and that's a good thing to do.
so by using your mantra that you were speaking about before, which
Mm-hmm.
was find your niche, I think, and
Yeah,
be consistent,
yeah.
that helped you focus and like not get into the noise of like the
Yeah, I
wider.
think that helped me
Yeah.
focus, and I think and the consistency side of it, again, if I apply, some of the stuff I've learned in consultancy, like, what are my values? What do I stand for as far as the wine's concerned? And so, I set out, okay, I'm going to stand for good wine. Good means I like it, in essence, trusting my own palate, affordable. So there's got to be some sort of value play that's within there and accessible as well. So purposely, what's the point of me saying this wine's absolutely fantastic? I got it from this corner shop or in this restaurant, and you can't have it. I thought that was not relevant to people, at least not on Instagram. So I just stuck with good, affordable, accessible as my core values, and then I basically post on 4 themes, which again I'm rigid on. So there's consistency in what I'm promoting around, whether it's on offer, whether it's lesser known grapes and regions are your friends, because that's a good angling, whether it's something about famous neighbours like that Chateauneuf du Pape Lirac example, that I gave in there. So just coming up with those sort of same pieces and then working through it.
Brilliant.
That's really useful, actually. You see me scribbling down wisdom.
I think it's
Yeah,
used for
like,
any
yeah,
business, isn't it? I think, Chris, to
Yeah,
your point, it's like
yeah,
it's almost touching on what you said before, and it's the irony almost of Instagram is you look at Instagram and it looks particularly the younger generation, it's instantaneous. I can be there immediately. I can have all this. I can do all this. I can build this up. The reality is, like you said, there's a hell of a lot of hard work gone into every element that you've done there.
Yeah, and I think you say any successful Instagram, I wouldn't, put myself in that zone compared to, what is potential. I'm successful in the wine world, but not in general. The same thing comes through. It's always about putting in the hard work and the hard graft.
Yeah,
that seems to come through wherever I look.
Definitely. I think it goes back a little bit. The bit that sprang to mind is when you talked about the truffles. Actually, it's almost the perfect analogy for that. It's that Chinese proverb, I think, isn't it? The best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago.
Yes.
The next best time
exactly.
is now. And it's exactly with that truffle piece of actually, that pre-preparation of going 2009, this is what I'm going to do. And planting it and believing it and feeding it and looking at that future.
Yeah.
And then
exactly
starting to hopefully reap the rewards, but keeping that consistency. I think it's phenomenal. It's brilliant what you've done there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Been an interesting journey.
I bet. Well, and still, and still massively evolving as well. I'm sure the fun is, as I said, is the fun is actually juggling between all the different elements. But I guess your challenge now is that the affordable wine hunter increases in popularity, you'll probably get dragged to more and more events, and it almost like spurs you on to do more content as well. So then your other ventures become the unloved children. You've got to try and balance them.
Yeah, exactly. No, I do have to say no to quite a lot in the wine stuff now, because it's just not relevant. Again, if I go back to the affordable, accessible, good argument of it, I get a lot that are not accessible just come. And at one point I'd be like happy to take a free bottle of wine. Oh yeah, fine. But I get enough now that I just say no. It's not fitting with what my kind of core message is, and Instagram punishes you for it as well, actually, because the when you look to do paid work, they look at your engagement scores, which is the kind of percentage of people who are liking, commenting, etc., as a percentage of your overall following. If I throw out something that's off topic, I don't get the likes and the comments, and then it gets ignored, which then brings my engagement score down. So it actually hurts me as much as it would do otherwise. I need to sort of stay on top of that, but it helps with the turning stuff down, because otherwise it could become overwhelming. It's certainly this time of year, it's feeling like there's I'm getting pinged quite a lot with, can you come to this, can we send you this bottle of wine, can you help us promote this for Christmas, and I've now learned from my sales friends, I just reply with you're very happy to send me a bottle of wine to sample. If you'd like me to do a dedicated post, I can send you my rates. It's the line I'm now trying to use.
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, you're right. If Berry Brothers send you an invite to a tasting, you'll go completely off piece of your kind of target audience. As much it'd be probably very nice afternoon.
Because much to say, I love all the fine wine as well, right? And actually, if I could spend my life doing all of that, would be fantastic. But the reality is, I've put my pitch in where I have done, for the reason I said before, right? And I've got to stick with that. And the occasional nicer bottle comes by way.
What was the trigger? Just when you talked about sort of March this year, you went from sort of 3,000 to now 100, 300, 4,000.
Yeah.
Was there a trigger for that? Was it just to build everything?
One post did very well, and that jumped me up maybe 10 or 20,000, and that was for a rosé, and actually thought, okay, so rosé is interesting to people, or is interesting to my new followers here, and so I then went into a series of what would be my go-to rosés in various stores. So I did like a sort of what would be my go-to rosé in Waitrose, what would be my go-to rosé in M&S, etc. So I, again, bringing back the analytics, I kind of was really looking, okay, why did that post do well? Okay, maybe I obviously got the right hook at the beginning, which is really important. And it was this wine that was promoted as a Whispering Angel dupe, which actually goes really well. People go, oh, great, I can get something that's equivalent to whipping it. So that post, I think John, you saw that one.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of kicker.
Yeah.
I then piggybacked off the back of that by running a whole series on rosé, and 70% of my followers are female. I know that's I don't know. That's a good thing or a bad thing. I've heard that's most like the fact that I kind of went more viral off the back of rosé posts. I wouldn't want to stereotype anyone, but also
I like
apparently,
rosé.
yeah, me too. So I drink loads of it. So actually, I was quite happy to do all that. No, but apparently it's more females buy wine in supermarkets. Now, it's difficult to not talk about gender stereotyping, but the feedback I'm getting from the marketplace is actually more women are buying the supermarket wine, and more men are doing the kind of fine wine, weekend shopping wine, and they'll go, to Majestic or to their wine store or to somewhere else like that. But the everyday stuff is coming through that way. But not as a blanket description, but there's a higher proportion that way, which probably explains that. So, and then equally, the champagne and sparkling wine posts I do seem to do better than the other ones as well. And Aldi, everyone seems to like Aldi, so
it's a bargain.
Yeah, exactly. Hidden gems.
Fantastic. Right. But we had an amazing conversation, and thank you, Andy, for being so open and honest. I think it's been educational for all of us, and I'm sure our listeners will love it as well. We'd love to have you back at some time, maybe even to do an online Aldi wine tasting or something like that. We could do virtually, and all have replica bottles together. But yes, so thank you very much.
We'll do it at 8:30 in the evening as opposed to 8:30 in the morning.
Yes, that could be a good idea. So thank you very much, Andy. If you want to find Andy on Instagram, look for The Affordable Wine Hunter, and you'll please go and follow him. You've been listening to the Just About Managing podcast. He's been Andy Pincott. He's been Lee Smith. He's been Chris Dingle, and I'm John Lloyd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Just About Managing. To stay up to date with new episodes, remember to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and discover what comes next on our LinkedIn page.